Hello, my name is Keisha L. Nelson, and my project is entitled Understanding Behaviors and Healing Through Developmental Theories. In this presentation, I will share a synthesis based on two project based learning experiences. I learned that developmental theory is not just academic content, but a tool that informed to help support a student's behavior in my classroom in the middle childhood adolescent stage, and navigating grief using healthy coping strategies in the early adulthood stage. This question guided my entire learning experience. Instead of asking what behavior needs to be fixed, I focused and learned to ask what developmental need is showing up here. That shift changed both my teaching practices and my personal coping strategies. How does understanding development change the way we respond to certain behaviors in others and ourselves? The behaviors of the student in my class were first viewed as defiance, and with grief in myself, avoidance and withdrawal were shown while grieving. However, through using developmental theories, reflection, and application, this emphasizes the importance of viewing development as a lifelong process that shapes behavior, relationships, and emotional regulation. Specifically, this highlights how understanding developmental stages and psychosocial needs helped guide more effective responses to student behavior in the classroom and supported the use of healthy coping strategies while navigating grief. The purpose of this presentation is to synthesize learning from two experiences to demonstrate how developmental theory informs real world practice. OD growth insight number one. My first growth insight came from supporting a 10-year-old student in the middle childhood to adolescent stage in my classroom who struggled with emotional regulation and peer interactions. This experience allowed me to apply developmental theory directly to real classroom challenges. Initially, these behaviors could have been viewed, like I said, as defiance. However, the lack of lasting improvement forced me to reconsider my approach and reflect on what the behavior was communicating developmentally. The student showed peer conflict and isolation within themselves, aggression and emotional outbursts. I noticed that traditional discipline was ineffective and there needed to be a developmentally need address to promote success. Theory lens of Eckerson helped me to understand that my student was seeking competence and belonging, industry versus inferiority. Her controlling behavior reflected insecurity and fear of failure rather than intentional misbehavior. From Erickson's perspective, when children reach these ages, they may struggle to experience success or acceptance within their peers. They may attempt to do this by asserting control or dominance as a means of protecting their self concept and warding off feelings of inferiority. Rather than viewing her behavior as simple defiance, I began to recognize it as a response to social isolation and unmet developmental needs. Theory lens of Piaget, concrete operational thought. Piaget's theory clarified that while she could reason academically, her emotional situations disrupted her logical thinking. This reinforced the need for guidance, and modeling instead of punishment. The applied change based upon theory was reflective conversations, guided problem solving, and positive reinforcement in engaging her in leadership roles. Using these theories, I adjusted my responses by focusing on reflection, empathy, and support. These strategies help her experience success and reduce those feelings of inferiority. OD growth outcome. Over time, the students' peer interactions improved, emotional regulation increased, and the classroom environment became more positive. This growth confirmed that theory driven practice is effective. Developmentally informed practices truly create meaningful change. And intentional support based upon theory can shift students from isolation toward competence and belonging. SD growth insight, grief, healthy coping. Now the shift to my self development. During this current stage of early adulthood, I faced multiple losses of loved ones and realized that the coping strategies were often avoidant rather than healthy. Grief disrupted my emotional regulation and affected my presence in relationships. This experience required me to apply the same developmental lens that I did with my student to myself. Unresolved grief was happening between the losses. Emotional suppression, withdrawal, and avoidance with my emotions were those things that were taking place. Theory lens of Eckerson as well, intimacy versus isolation, unresolved grief, you see, leads to isolation. Erickson's theory helped me to understand how avoiding grief leads to emotional isolation during the early adulthood stage. By suppressing my emotions and staying busy to avoid pain, I unintentionally created distance between myself and the people who were meant to provide support. This avoidance interfered with Eckerson's stage of intimacy versus isolation, where forming and maintaining meaningful relationships is a central developmental task. In addition, Erickson's development is characterized as a lifelong process in which individuals face a series of psychosocial conflicts, which must be resolved in order to promote healthy development. Kubler Ross theory, non-linear grief. The Kubler Ross model of grief place a huge emphasis on that grief is not a linear experience that has a clear beginning and end. Instead, it shows how it involves multiple stages, such as denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, which can occur at different times and in different orders. I recognize that I often shifted between these stages, especially during moments of avoidance or emotional overwhelming. Understanding that this fluctuation was a normal part of grief. It truly helped reduce self criticism and encouraged me to intentionally engage in healthier coping strategies rather than suppressing my emotions. This perspective supported my emotional awareness and ongoing healing. Cognitive behavior theory, CBT. By synthesizing cognitive behavior theory with my personal experiences of grief, I gained a deeper understanding of how my thought patterns shaped my emotional regulation and coping behaviors. During periods of loss, I had negative and avoidant thoughts which intensified my emotional distress and contributed to those unhealthy coping responses. Through intentional journaling and reflection, I became more aware of those cognitive patterns and learned to challenge and reframe unhelpful thoughts. This integration of theory and practice allowed me to respond more intentionally, improve emotional regulation, and recognize the importance of actively reshaping cognitive responses as a part of healthy grieving and long term emotional development. These frameworks normalize my emotional experience and help me recognize harmful thought patterns and was able to suppress those emotions. Cognitive behavior theory, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are interconnected. Negative thought patterns truly influence emotional responses, and intentional reflection ultimately supports healthier coping strategies. Apply change. By synthesizing developmental theory with intentional self reflection, I implemented consistent strategies to actively process grief rather than to avoid it. Daily devotionals, which I call them daily mercies, provided structure and emotional grounding. Waking up each day before to have that healthy mindset and positive thoughts helped create that grounding. While journaling allowed me to examine and challenge unhelpful thought patterns, maintaining accountability with trusted family supported consistency and emotional openness. Together, these practices strengthened my emotional regulation and enabled healthier coping, reinforcing the importance of intentional, theory informed action in personal development. Self development growth outcome healthy coping strengthens resilience. Through the intentional application of developmental theory and consistent coping strategies, I experienced meaningful growth in my emotional awareness as well, as my student using those applications with her through developmental theory was also there was meaningful growth. In my emotional awareness, as well as with the student, regulation, and resilience while navigating these behaviors. Daily devotionals, journaling, and accountability with family allowed me to move beyond avoidance and engage more openly with my emotions. As a result, developing healthier coping responses, increased emotional presence in my relationships, and a greater acceptance of grief as an ongoing process. The growth demonstrated that developmentally informed practices truly support long term emotional healing and promote healthy psychosocial development during early adulthood stage. Development, lifelong. Developmental theory applies across the lifespan and shapes how we understand behavior and emotional growth. As shown within my student and within myself, developmental theory is not a linear development with us as humans. When developmental needs are recognized and addressed intentionally, responses become more empathetic and effective, with empathy rather than judgment. Whether supporting students or ourselves, meaningful growth occurs through reflection, understanding, and developmentally informed support. Developmental theory applies truly across a lifespan. It is definitely ongoing, and theory guides meaningful change. As you see, these two, the OD and the SD, have been connected to show that developmental theories definitely drive success, and that it is not linear and it is a continued process, and those lifespans and those stages occur at different times in our lives. Thank you.